Position to Win is a community for women who are on a journey to put themselves in position to win, in pageantry and in life. On the Position to Win podcast, current and former local, state, national, and international title holders from various systems give you insight into their journeys, tips and tricks, and of course, authentic, unfiltered conversation. Here you will find the motivation you need to take up space, shatter glass ceilings, serve with intention, and fiercely chase crowns. This is not just for pageant girls. This is where we find what we need to put ourselves in position to win. I'm your host, Jada Samuel.
I am very excited to have a special guest on today, Meera Bhonslé, a graduate of the University of South Carolina's School of Journalism. She's a journalist, an on-air personality, a literacy advocate, and she's one of the few people that I feel like I can share an entire wardrobe with because we are not only the same height, but we are also the same shoe size, and we have almost the same measurements, so that's like a miracle in this life. She speaks 5 languages, plays the piano, and has one of the most beautiful faces, and of course, one of the biggest hearts. So I could go on and on and on, but I am often and easily, I tell people that you can see God's light shine through Meera when you are around her. It's just in her aura. It's just, that's her energy. That's her spirit. And I'm so thrilled to welcome Meera Bhonslé to Position to Win.
Hi, how are you?
I'm wonderful. How are you?
Good. Thank you for that wonderful introduction, by the way.
Of course, because you're amazing. So the introduction had to be worthy of you. So I don't think that I mentioned in your introduction that you are currently Miss South Carolina, USA. Like, whoa.
Yes. Coming to a close very soon, but I am Miss South Carolina, USA.
Well, because this is a podcast about pageants, we're going to start with that. Where and how did your pageant journey begin? Tell us a little bit about where you started off, how this came into play.
Yeah, so my mom put me in my first pageant when I was 5 months old, over here in Columbia, South Carolina, and she carried me across the stage, and I won, and from then on is just kind of where I started. So I did some festival pageants locally, and then I did like middle school pageants. I did my high school pageant, and then started off in the Miss America circuit and jumped over to the Miss USA system 5 years ago, I want to say. And so, yeah, just kind of one of those things that I was pushed into and have been doing it ever since.
So you were pushed into it, but the choice to compete in a different system was all your own. Can you tell me about what kind of drove you to transition from like festival pageants and the Miss America organization to the Miss USA organization?
Yeah, so after my high school pageant, I just did it for fun. I never intended on being a pageant girl or doing big pageants, but obviously as a little girl I had a dream, like so many do, to be Miss USA or be Miss America, but I didn't ever think I would really pursue it because I didn't have that skill set of confidence, so it was a dream that was in passing. But I won my high school pageant my senior year, and a judge was I think she was Miss South Carolina USA at the time, actually. Her name is Megan Pinckney, now Megan Rutherford. And she messaged me after the pageant, and she said, I really think you should come compete in the Teen USA system. And I was like, oh, she thinks so much of me. I was so afraid of that system because I always thought, I had a perception of the system that it was for just like tall girls, these really exquisitely gorgeous human beings that are like glamazons. Like I had this totally crazy thing in my head about the USA system. So anyways, I actually registered to compete in the Teen USA pageant for South Carolina twice and never went because I was so scared. So there was like $300 down the drain 2 times. Sorry. We're not going to talk about that though. But yeah, so did my high school pageant, didn't really think anything of Megan's message, just was like, oh, this is nice. But I went on to compete at some of the America local preliminary pageants because I wanted scholarship money for college, and I had a talent. execution of it wasn't ever that great because I have terrible stage fright. But nonetheless, so I competed at Miss South Carolina America twice. That was in 2016 and 2018.
And we competed together, and we had such a great time.
Yes, we had so much fun together. It was awesome. I've met so many of my lifelong friends through that organization, and so I'm so thankful because that's really, I feel like, where I got my like start in big girl pageants. But yeah, so 2018 was my last year in the America system, and that same year somebody had just told me like, hey, come over to the USA system. You have a wardrobe. The South Carolina America pageant's in June. USA was in November at the time. It's like, okay, why not? Went in not expecting anything. Not expecting anything. That was my first time ever. That year I placed 4th runner up. And
I was there and I was like, oh my gosh. That was so exciting because, we're going to get into it later, but just like being like a short like woman of color and just like being a little bit different than everybody else in the top 5, I was thrilled that you were in the top 5 even.
It was the shock of a lifetime. I thought, this is it. I'm just gonna, and I had so much fun is the whole reason I went back. And so I went back the next year, and then on my 4th try I won, which again, didn't expect it, but I just had so much fun with the organization and in that system. And here I am now, about to give up my title in 5 weeks. So
let's go back a little bit. You were on that stage in 2018. You got 4th runner-up. You came back several times. I'm on the stage with you 4 years later. Well, 5 years later, actually, right? Because of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And you win, and I am back there as a non like top 5er, and I am like screaming like, oh my gosh, like it was so cool to see you win. And then a few weeks later we went to dinner, and it was like you still hadn't processed it. Have you, now that you're almost like done with your year, have you like taken it all in that you won Miss South Carolina USA, and that is something that you will be able to say for the rest of your entire life?
So I think, update, it's finally hitting me. And it's just been in these last few weeks where I'm like, this year just happened. And it's been so quick, but like, I think now that I'm, writing farewell speeches and final thank you letters and kind of wrapping it up is when I'm like, oh, this is what my last year of my life has been. And it has been the coolest thing ever to reflect on it and appreciate every part of the journey. Sometimes it still feels like, how the heck did this happen? But, I always kind of kick myself for thinking like that, because obviously God has a plan for every one of us, and I think he put me in this position for a reason, whether I believe I deserved it or not. And so it's just been a really, really cool year, or I guess time reflecting on the year and realizing that, yeah, it happened.
It certainly did. And I love that you just mentioned that, God does have a plan for every single one of our lives. Women in pageantry, women in business, women in all of these different industries. There are so many different ways that he has his hand on our lives, right? So as much as this podcast is about pageantry, it's also about winning in life. And I know for you, your faith plays a huge role in your life. We've had many personal conversations. For those of you who don't know that are listening, we went to journalism school together, which is why I led with that. So we've known each other as classmates. We've known each other as people competing with each other in pageants. And I would say we know each other as genuine friends. I absolutely love you. And so I know how much faith plays a part in your life. You went back to Miss South Carolina USA 4 times. Mm-hmm. Some people went on the 7th try, some people went on the 1st try. How did faith play a role in that journey for you?
Yeah, so going back to that dream that I'd always had as a little kid, and then adding to that, just this is kind of a big part that I missed out earlier, but my parents are both immigrants. So my mom is from Central America and my dad is from India. And when my mom came to the United States, she didn't speak any English. She was 14 years old. She was bullied in school for not speaking English. And she would watch beauty pageants. And that was part of what helped her learn English. And it was actually a dream that she had to compete in a pageant. And she never had the opportunity to do it, being a young immigrant girl just thrown into the world. She started working the day she got here and hasn't stopped since. But yeah, so part of the dream was to kind of play on that dream that my mom had too. And so every year I went back because I felt like God was telling me to go back. And I have had this discussion with a lot of mentors about, the little voice inside of you and discerning that as God. And he was just telling me, like, just go back and do it. Just go back and do it. And it was never because I wanted to win. It was just more so because I wanted to be representation in this organization that, is typically tall, blonde, blue-eyed, like whatever people categorize it as. And so I just wanted to come back every year and be a representative of a 5'2" brown girl on a stage. And I felt like it was God just telling me to just go out of your comfort zone, like just keep doing it, and who knows what'll happen.
I absolutely love that. And that as a fellow 5'2", 5'3", multiracial, brown girl, I understand like how important it is to keep showing up, because one year showing up might mean something to one little girl, and then another girl who didn't get to watch you the previous year sees you on stage and you become an inspiration and a role model. So I completely align with all that you are saying about just showing up and being that representation. So I know that, we stand out in a crowd when there's a line of 12 girls across the stage, and everyone's 5'9" and model-esque, and that is what you are getting in the USA system, and everyone has like this long hair, and I mean, I'm competing with this hair, we're both competing as these, different women on the stage. We look different from the women that we're standing beside. Did you ever struggle with worthiness when you finally won because you didn't look like some of the people that have stood in that position in the past?
Yes. So really all throughout the journey, it's always been kind of in the back of my mind that like, am I really good enough for this? Because I'm so petite, again, going back to being 5'2", like it kind of is a big deal because people were telling me to harp on that in my interview. Like, just because I'm little doesn't mean I, can't do this job. And I get it, but at the same time, it's like, why does that have to be a weakness? Being a brown girl, I think a lot of people, oftentimes, I almost felt like an exhibit in a museum to people in this industry, because it's like, oh, you're so exotic or ethnic or whatever. And I'm like, can we just embrace the diversity and like obviously appreciate it? But it's not something to, I don't know. It just, sometimes it's been weird. But yeah, so after I won, I did go through a little phase of like, did I really, like, am I worthy of this? Like, did I deserve this? And I will say, because I know that I have always kind of carried the underdog persona throughout my pageant career, like people, like I'm a likable person, I would say, but I don't know that everyone has ever seen me being the winner or, being the representative for South Carolina. And so, I know that the year I won, my first runner-up, who I love dearly, I mean, she is an incredible person and I really respect her. But I know that a lot of people were rooting for her. And so it was kind of hard because I felt like I was taking that away from her, and I felt like people didn't want me to be the winner because, they wanted her instead. Which, I mean, when we were standing up there, granted, I said, you're going to do great at Miss USA. I'm so proud of you. I'm so excited for you, because I thought it was her. And so I did struggle with that. I'll be very transparent about it. And it makes it even harder because she's such an amazing person. If she was like a mean girl, I'd be like, oh, I want it, like whatever. But she is phenomenal. And so that did make it difficult for a little while there, because I was like, is this really supposed to be for me? So, yeah.
But going back to just being women of faith, obviously those insecurities are real, and sometimes they are so loud, especially when you are different or other, or, you feel like there's someone else who might have been, quote unquote more deserving of whatever because of the time that they've put in, or the list of qualifications that they have to meet whatever goal. How did your faith play into you, like, kind of coming into, like, accepting that? Because I also know that you said earlier God had a plan for you, and you believed that. So how did your faith kind of play into you just kind of, like, this was me, accepting that this was your year.
Yeah. So a lot of it was conversations with people like you and other friends and mentors that I have in my life who had to drill it in me. They're like, there's a reason for all of this. And the first couple of weeks of doing appearances and going into schools in South Carolina where, it was predominantly Black children, I felt like I was representing them too. And I felt like they really appreciated somebody who looked a little bit more like them. And I mean, you harped on that a little bit earlier, but I just feel like that for me was like, okay, like there's a reason I'm here. Like these kids see something in me and they're so excited to see representation. And I was like, okay, God, like I'm finally seeing it. And so it's just through little experiences like that over my first couple weeks, I had to really remind myself, like, there's a reason for this. Like, it doesn't have to be millions of people that are excited on the internet. It can just be 3 kids in a classroom somewhere in Gaston, South Carolina, wherever, that took something from my year. And that means so much to me.
Listen, as someone who has never won a state title, I can tell you that those local appearances have meant just as much to me as they could mean to someone who is wearing South Carolina across their chest. So, yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. There's just so much power in showing up and going to the places that sometimes people aren't necessarily fond of going to, those elementary schools that aren't on the top of the list for a lot of students. So I feel that's so important, and I'm so glad that you've had the opportunity to go across South Carolina and read to these kids and show up and be a representative for them. You've been amazing. I'm so... Guys, I'm one of Meera's largest fans, okay? One of her biggest fans. So after Miss USA, we're going to get into a post that I just feel like meant so much to so many people. You made a post on Instagram and you talked about the waiting season. And I'm going to read a few lines. I was pulling that up for anybody who's watching the video. If you saw my eyes looking down, I was on Instagram literally pulling up the post because I have to read it word for word. You started off with a scripture, and it's Psalm 130, verse 5. And it says, I wait for the Lord. My whole being waits. In his word, I put my hope. In his word, I put my hope. Like, that's what we have to do, right? So I'm going through Instagram this day, and I'm like, yes, this scripture is beautiful. Let me go through this post and read. And I'm reading about, like, her talking about her dog, and then it gets into this part, and you're, like, leading up to Miss USA. You had all these conversations with God about winning and losing, and, whatever he had planned, you were excited about what was next. And then it transitions, right? And you're like 2 months post pageant, and I'm straight up not having a good time. No. Like, this is not fun. Like, this whole waiting portion of my life is not fun. And then she goes on, guys, you have to go check out the post. I will link it down below in the podcast description or something, because everyone has to read this. And they have to read it in your words. But there was another part that really stood out for me. And it was like, here I am, currently in a metaphorical waiting room, which she was actually in the waiting room at the time, guys, with her dog. So you got to go read the post for it all to make sense. A place we've all been in before. I've been resting with God in a spirit of impatience because I am longing to meet my calling. My vision of an expedited shipment on a new life has quickly become a reality check that there cannot be a harvest without sowing. When I tell you guys, I was like, this is a sermon. This is a whole sermon. Like, this whole post, again, you have to read the entire thing, but that portion really stood out to me because I feel like that is what Position to Win is about. Sometimes we think that the journey is about winning the crown at the end, but in reality, it's about putting ourselves in position to win not only this crown, but prepare ourselves for what God has for us on the other side. So I was like, Meera has to be my first guest on this podcast, because this is literally the gist of what this entire podcast hopefully will be about and mean to someone. So one, thank you for that post and for being transparent. There's power in transparency, and I told you that the next day when you had people that you didn't know reposting your post. And I know that you don't know exactly what's next, but what are some things that you do in the meantime when you are in that waiting season to maintain peace about the future? And I know that, like, there might be some things that you do just that are like personal, but what are some of those actual things that you do or that you tell yourself during that waiting season?
Yeah, so, and listen, I'm still in the waiting room, still here, still at my parents' house. So it's been a challenge because I've always been so go, 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 and like have always had everything planned. And I think this is very much a learning experience for me. Like, God is teaching me a lesson that, hey, not everything is gonna just happen. And so in this time, I've been just doing a lot of reflecting. It's been good for me to spend a lot of time with God, like, in the Word, and just worshiping and just listening to what He has to say, and really just trying to quiet my heart and make sure that I'm hearing from Him and not taking an opportunity because I think it's a good thing, but I always want to make sure that I'm careful in my decisions and making sure that He's leading me in every step of the way. And so just doing a lot of working on this relationship here, as well as, there are days that are really hard and I don't want to get out of bed, and I don't get out of bed. And at some point, I'm like, okay, time to get up, pull yourself together. So, whether that's working on my resume, looking at career options that I think are what I want to go into, praying about those options. I just like to do a lot of, I guess, like prerequisite work, if that makes sense. Like, that makes me feel like I'm being useful and like I'm making the proper steps in the right direction. So really a balance of resting and just putting a pause on all of the hustle and bustle, but at the same time looking forward to what's next and working on how can I be better to prepare myself for what God is about to put into my life.
I love that because, sometimes we think about the waiting period only as like waiting for the crown, right? We're competing and every year we're getting better and we're waiting until it's our turn to wear the crown. And sometimes that opportunity never comes. But I love to think of each year as me getting better at something that has nothing to do with pageantry, right? Like, so many girls are preparing and they're doing all of these other things, but like, how do you know that God is not preparing you for a job interview that you're going to have somewhere soon? How do you know that He's not using your time of community service to lead you into something that's going to be like your career for the rest of your life, something that you're passionate about? How do you know that He's not sending you on these appearances to meet people and meet someone that could potentially change your life, So I think that sometimes the waiting period can be overwhelming, but I think we just have to reframe how we're looking at it. And I think that's why I loved your post so much, is that we just have to, reframe how we look at the waiting room.
Yes, it's definitely a mind skin thing. If you're, gonna see it as like, oh, just waiting around, there's nothing, if you're just gonna wait around and not doing anything, then you're doing it all wrong. There has to be some sort of embrace there, and you just have to be able to take it on, and it's not gonna look glamorous all the time. You might, just be in your house the entire day in your pajamas the whole day doing house chores, and that's okay. But it's all working towards the greater plan that God has for our lives, and I really believe that. And it's one of those things that some days I am like, I only believe it this much, and then other days I'm like, I believe it this much. But I think just having that little bit of faith and knowing that there's something good coming, then there you go, there you have it.
And there's always something good coming, right?
Yeah.
That's been one of the things that like keeps me moving forward in this life is that, something all good is always over the next mountain that you're climbing. So, I love that you've just been so open and honest and transparent throughout your year. And I just love watching you shine. And so, a question that I have to ask every single guest, not that we haven't already taken a little dive into it, but how has pageantry put you in position to win in life?
I love that. I would say that pageantry has put me in a position to be confident in what I have been gifted with, to be thankful for the gifts that God has given me, the person that I am, and to not compare myself to others. So it's been a journey of embracing myself as a person and doing everything I can to make the best of my gifts and to impart into other people's lives in the way that I have been called to. And that is something that I've been able to do this year, and I hope that I can continue doing. And I just feel like he has used this year to really sharpen me and, pull out a sense of confidence that may not have been there before, or, help me get out of my comfort zone. So there are so many different things. It's a whole web that this year has done to just sharpen me and prepare me. I really feel like this has just been a stepping stone for something greater, and I'm really, really excited for whatever that is. But yeah, it's just been really, really amazing.
I love that. I knew you were going to give us a whole inspirational moment, but I had no clue that it was going to be that beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing with my listeners. And I know I started off this podcast talking about how beautiful of a soul you have, but I truly hope that everyone has gotten a smidge of an opportunity to see and or hear just a glimpse of that today. So I appreciate you for joining me, and thank you so much for coming on Position to Win and sharing your experience and just your faith and what keeps you going. So how can people follow you or get in touch with you? I know that you are giving up your Miss South Carolina USA crown soon, but life goes on after that. So how can they get in touch with you, follow you, keep up with you, all of those things?
Yeah, so I guess Instagram is probably the easiest way. My handle is just M for my first name and Bhonsle, Bhonsle. So that's me on Instagram. I'm on Facebook too, LinkedIn. I love LinkedIn Moment, Twitter. It's the same. It's just my first and last name. There aren't too many Meera Bhonsles out there, I guess. So pretty easy to find. But yeah, I'm doing this gig for 5 more weeks, and then we're wrapping it up, and we'll see what's next.
I am so thrilled for you, and I can't wait to be there in the crowd when you are completing this beautiful journey that you've had. So I'm so thankful for you coming on Position to Win.
I'm thankful for you, Jada. It takes a good one to know a good one, and you certainly are golden.
Well, thank you. And thank you all so much for listening. Be sure to like us on Facebook at facebook.com/positioned to win. Follow us on Instagram, TikTok, and YouTube at Positioned to Win. And of course, you can listen to this podcast on all of your favorite streaming platforms. So again, thank you for listening, and thank you for joining us, Meera. I absolutely adore you.
Love you, girl.